Hello there and welcome to this video, and this video is going to be titled 8 Essential Tips for Beginning with Modular Synth. And these tips are things that either I did when I started out with Modular Synth, or they're things that I wish that I'd done. And so the idea behind this video is two reasons. One, hopefully it will serve as a helpful resource or guide for anybody who is starting out with modular. But also, I'd really like to hear from you guys and hear if you have any particular tips for beginners, or things that you did when you started out that you wish you'd done, or maybe things that you didn't do that you wish you'd done. So that's the idea behind this video. It's a hot day today here in the UK, but it's never too hot for a cup of tea. And of course, a cup of tea is always pleasant when accompanied with a couple of biscuits. So if you have a cup of tea, cheers. If not, get a cup of tea. Anyway, so tip number one. Just start out with a few modules. Don't try and get too many modules in the beginning. I think it's quite tempting to buy, to sort of, you can go and spec up a case and a whole load of modules that you think you might need, go and read on forums, watch videos, and you see all these different kinds of modules. You think, I need one of those, I need one of those, I need one of those, and you can end up spending quite a lot of money in the beginning without really having any idea what to do with those modules, or whether you actually do need them or not. So this first tip I think is quite important, and that is to just try and work out what is the essential modules that you need to start off with, just to sort of get you going and exploring a little bit. I think when I started my first case, I had a wooden case, which actually is up here. So if you can see this was my first case. It's empty now, apart from a few blank panels. I mean, one day I might put some stuff in there and have it as an extra case. But that was my first case. So that case, I had, the first module I bought was I can't remember what it's called, Bafako output module, which it's still here in this case now. It's just on the end there, and that just has a stereo left and right in and a left and right out, so you can get a stereo signal out of your case, and it just converts it from the Modular Synth level to line level, I believe, which allowed me to plug the output into my desk, or nowadays if I'm playing out anywhere, you can go straight into the PA. I couldn't put it into the desk to record it to the computer. So that was actually the first module that I bought. It doesn't do anything. So for quite some time I had that case and I had that module in it and nothing else. And I couldn't do anything. The next two modules that I bought, so I bought two modules at the same time, I think, and that was marbles, Mutable Instruments marbles, or a clone of that, and Mutable Instruments rings. So I bought those two, and for a really long time I just had those two modules, and that just allowed me to just kind of mess around with creating some random sequences and having a module that you could generate some sounds with and experiment with some melodies and different features. So maybe it's not necessarily the traditional first modules that you would get, marbles and rings, but there was a reason why I got those first, and that kind of leads on to my second point. So before buying any modules at all, and before investing any money into modular, because it is an expensive thing to get into, I started using VCV rack first, and I would highly recommend that anybody who is even just the slightest bit interested in modular synth should download a copy of VCV first. It's completely free. There's a lot of modules in there that are straight straight replicas of the real hardware versions. There are tons of tutorials online that you can follow. So VCV is the best way to get started. So I got a copy of VCV, and I think it was probably because a friend maybe had told me about it. I can't remember exactly how I found out about VCV, but I got a copy, and for quite a few weeks I just spent time just going through tutorials on YouTube. So where there would be somebody's creating a patch and you can follow it through, so I'd literally just copy it, everything that they were doing, and like watch a little bit of the video, pause it, do a bit, then unpause it, watch the next bit, pause it, and so on. And through doing that, I learned quite a bit about what different modules did and the sorts of modules that I liked and that I found interesting. And then from there, I started trying to create my own patches using some of those modules that I'd used following the tutorials. Now, of course, in the beginning, as I've mentioned previously in other videos, I was trying to create backing tracks in order to play the guitar along with. And so a lot of the music that I was interested in was generative and also kind of ambient, because that was sort of nice, floaty kind of stuff to experiment with and practice guitar over the top of. And that's where the rings and marbles came in. And so I did use those quite a lot to begin with. And that was the reason why those were the first couple of modules that I bought, because I wanted to try and recreate some of what I was doing in VCV in my hardware rack, and then sort of expand on that. So slowly over time, I started buying more modules and slowly building the case. And I think if you look at some of my earlier videos, you can see that wooden case, and you can see some of the modules. And there's a few more modules, and then there's quite a large empty section, and slowly over time that gets filled until the case was full, and then eventually I bought a larger case, and slowly, as I was using the hardware more, I started using VCV less, to the point where nowadays I don't really use VCV very much at all. I do still use it occasionally when I want to try certain things out, or if I'm away from home and I don't have my modular with me and I want to just have a little mess about. So I do still use VCV, but it's a lot less than it used to be. So those first two tips kind of sort of tie in together, which is tip number one was just start out with a few modules first, and then also try using VCV. Going back to point number one, did I say this? I don't think I did. So the main reason for just having a few modules first is that you don't want to get overwhelmed with having lots of modules to try and learn. So I guess I didn't necessarily do it this way, but I think this is probably a better way, which is to just try and explore. If you've just got a couple of modules that you can use, you really get to grips with those modules and you can really explore them. The constraints of having just a few modules will force you into a way of working where you'll be much more creative. So If you have lots and lots and lots of modules all at the same time that are all brand new, then the chances are that you'll sort of dip in and out of all of them, and there might be one or two that you'll use a lot, and then there'll probably be quite a few that you just don't really use at all, or you don't really get to grips with, because it's too much to take in one go. I used to make this exact same mistake when in my younger days, when buying albums, and I'd get my student loan money come through and would go to whatever record shop or HMV or whatever and buy a load of albums, and inevitably what would happen is that there'd be like one or two albums that I would just listen to constantly, and they would become like eventually like my favorite albums, and there'd be like one or two really great albums, but I just wouldn't get round to listening to them, so they just sit on the side somewhere and would never really excuse me, never really get used. So the same principle I think applies with buying modules. Just buy a few to start with that you can get to grips with, and then as you grow and as you learn those, then you add to them. Okay. Tip number 3 is to seek help. So help can come in many forms. It could be a friend that you know that's into modular, that's happy to give you some tips. It could be if you're a student, it could be a lecturer or a teacher. It could be as simple as just watching tutorials on YouTube. It could be seeking out some kind of formal instruction, but having somebody there that can sort of point you in the right direction, help you a little bit, make sure that you avoid certain mistakes that people make, or if you've got questions that you can just directly ask them questions and seek guidance, is really, really useful. So when I started out, I spent a lot of time watching tutorials on YouTube, and I learned a lot from there. But I also had a friend who was into modular already, and so I could quiz him about things and ask him questions. And then for a brief time, I actually did pay for sort of one-to-one lessons with somebody who was a musical artist, modular synth artist, who did sort of tuition as well. And I had a few lessons with them. They were quite expensive, so I couldn't have too many of those, but it did sort of just help push me in the right direction in terms of how to actually go about creating music with modular and so on. So I think it's really important in the beginning not to try and do things on your own. Sometimes it is beneficial to make mistakes, and we do learn from mistakes, but it's also sometimes very frustrating when you're trying to achieve certain things and you don't necessarily know how to achieve those things, and sometimes it feels like you're banging your head against a wall. So seeking help is, of course, as with many things in life, a really important thing to do when starting out. Okay, tip number 4, which maybe just kind of relates to that, I guess, and that is, it's very tempting to watch videos on YouTube or listen to music and to compare what you're doing with the instrument with what other people are doing, and sometimes that can make you feel quite negative about your music or about your abilities and skills. And the thing to understand, I think, is that we are all unique individuals, and we will all make music in our own way, and the result of that will always be very different from another person. And we can listen to another person's music, and we can enjoy it and appreciate it and be inspired by it, and then want to go out and make music ourselves, inspired by that, and the result be something very different. And then sometimes, by comparing that result to what the original inspiration was, or the music that we were listening to in the first place, because it's so different, it can make us feel a little bit negative about what we've produced. And in actual fact, the truth of the matter is that we may have produced something quite interesting, and a good piece of music, but we don't feel that way about it because we're comparing ourselves to someone else. So I think this tip, number 4, is not to compare yourself to other people. If you have to make comparisons of your music, make comparisons of your past self, of the music that you've made in the past. Have you improved over time? Have you changed the way that you do things? That really is the only comparison to make. As I say, we're all unique individuals, and we all do things in our own way. So it doesn't really make sense to compare yourself to others, and hopefully try not to get too sort of down when you think that your music isn't as good as other people's, because actually it may well do, and there's probably somebody else out there who is looking at your music and thinking, oh, I wish my music sounded like that, or I wish I could do something like that. So trying to compare yourself to others is never a good thing, so try and avoid that if you can. Tip number 5, do the cliches. There are no doubt several cliches in the modular world. Well, there are lots of cliches within music in general. I mean, the obvious thing that springs to mind are the aforementioned mutable instruments, rings into clouds. I almost feel like that has become a genre in its own right within the realm of modular synth. If you just Google rings into clouds, there will be gazillions of videos that come up. I've done my fair share of patches that are based on rings into clouds, and I can't say that I will probably ever tire of that, because it does sound nice at the end of the day. But you can't really avoid cliches, or you can't move beyond cliches, I think, if you haven't actually explored the cliche in the first place. So if you've never done the classic rings into clouds ambient type patch, then you're probably missing out, because it does sound great. But also, how can you move beyond that? How can you learn and develop and explore beyond that if you've not actually done it in the first place? So I think any kind of cliche, try them out and see what happens, and see what accidents, or what, as I talked about in a previous video, we have lots of happy little accidents with modular, where we come up with ideas unintentionally. So sometimes when doing something quite cliched, you can end up with a lot of these little happy accidents, and something interesting comes out. Incidentally, so rings into clouds is probably the most well-known cliche, but what other modular synth cliches are there? I'm not sure. Maybe if you can think of some, leave a comment about that as well. Okay, these next two tips are more of a practical nature. So the first one is get a tuner. Now you could have a tuner within your rack. I, however, prefer to use, oh my god, there is such a tangle of cables here. I prefer to use a little handheld tuner. This is a Korg. It's like a guitar tuner type thing, and I've just put a little adapter in there so I can plug that in. I can plug that into any module and tune it. This has probably saved my life on a number of occasions when performing. Firstly, I find it really, really hard to tune a modular by ear. I don't know why. I don't have any problem tuning a guitar by ear. I spent a significant portion of my life playing guitar, and tuning a guitar in all kinds of conditions. I used to teach guitar lessons in a little music shop, and it was in a tiny little room, and I'd have a group of 6 or 7 children in that room, and they would be all thrashing their guitars, acoustic guitars, electric guitars, and I'd have to tune each of their guitars at the start of the lesson, and it was so loud and noisy, but I managed to tune the guitars no problem. For whatever reason, though, I find it really difficult to tune modular by ear. I don't know why. Whether it's something to do with the sound of the oscillators, maybe. I don't know. But anyway, having a tuner, I consider essential. And then, of course, there are other reasons to have a tuner where it's impossible to tune by ear because you can't have the sound playing out loud. So, for example, some gigs that I've done where I've needed to retune an oscillator between tracks, and the audience don't want to hear the sound of me doing that, or maybe it's whilst the band that I was in is still playing, and I can't just be making crazy tuning sounds whilst they're playing, so I've got to do it silently, and having the tuner there is the only way that I could do that. So a tuner is essential. Second thing that is essential is some kind of scope, oscilloscope, and again you can get these in the rack, or you can get handheld versions. Again, I've got another little handheld version here. I have no idea, can't remember what this is called. It was cheap, it was off eBay. It comes with a few cables and things. I had to kind of, I mean, this is bad, isn't it? Like I got a couple of patch cables and cut the end off, and then spliced it together with some electrical tape in order to get the signals in. But this I have found really, really useful. Again, when I don't tend to use it so much these days, but definitely when I was starting out, I used to use it quite a lot to just try and confirm visually what I thought I was hearing or what I was expecting to hear. I used to use a scope quite a lot when with VCV, just to sort of check what you're doing and check sometimes what signal you're sending where. So having a scope, and again, you know, whether that's in the rack, I probably wouldn't have one in the rack because it takes up space and they're expensive. That was probably like 20 or 30 quid. I don't know how much, but certainly cheaper than it would be to have one in the rack. So so get yourself a scope, very useful. You can learn a lot about wave shapes and waveforms and what's going on with the voltage that you're sending to different places and so on. So very useful. And then the final tip, number 8, which I think is really, really useful. And this probably goes for any kind of music, not necessarily modular, and that is to record yourself. Whether or not you intend to release that and put that out into the world is up to you, but even if it's just for your own personal documentation, record what you do. Record yourself, listen back to it, learn from it, notice where things aren't working or where things are working, and get into the habit of doing that, so you've got some kind of record. There's a lot you can learn from listening to yourself, but also going back to that earlier point about comparing yourself, it's also useful if you want to look back, like a year ago, 2 years ago, what was I doing and what am I doing now? How have I changed? How have I improved? And if you've got that record, that's one of the reasons that I do this YouTube channel is it's a kind of forces me to record myself. Even it's not necessary, as I say, if you don't want to release the music or put it out or whatever. I do that because, well, I don't know really. Maybe that's the subject of another video. But it kind of forces me to make recordings and forces me to, to do that and to look at what I'm doing. So, so recording yourself, I think, is a really, really useful thing to do. There was something else I was going to say on that, and it's completely gone out of my head. This happens from time to time. I mean, quite often when I'm just talking to somebody, I will forget what I'm saying whilst I'm talking to them. It's gone. I'll probably remember later, and I'll put it in the comments or the description or something. Anyway, so those are my 8 tips, essential tips for beginning with Modular Synth. If you're a beginner and you found those tips useful, then please leave a comment. If you've been a modular synthesist for some time or many years and you have some additional tips, or maybe you don't agree with those tips, all's fair. But please do leave a comment and like the video, subscribe, all the rest of it, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Cheerio.